Hello, hi Sean.
Hello. Nice to hear from you.
Yeah, pleasure to have you on Truth Sentinel. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You're actually the second person I've had on this show who has a famous father, and coincidentally, you've interviewed the other person's father in question on your own show. We recently had Gareth Icke on.
Oh, really?
Yeah, on this show. So I watched your interview with David Icke recently, and it certainly went better than the interview with Jesse Ventura on conspiracy theory. What did you think of what David had to say?
Well, actually, I was going to say I'd be really curious to know what Gareth has to say, because obviously I'm curious to know how being raised by a father who's obviously been out there and, considered out there since the early 90s, how that would affect Gareth's attitude and his worldview and just his own understanding if he's come to his own conclusions, or if he's rejected his father's ideas. But as far as David goes, I don't have any antipathy towards him. A lot of people who are conspiracy theorists, think that he's he's too much in his allegations about the reptilians, or thinking outside of this three-dimensional hologram reality that we live in. But I feel like he's kind of a gateway drug as far as I'm concerned. He's the guy that introduced a lot of us to theories that were outside the box, and in a much further exiting this three-dimensional realm, entering this concept of fourth dimensional alien presences and bloodlines and whatnot of these so-called alien beings, the Anunnaki. He's introduced us to a lot of these ideas that, yes, they've been around there, and he was not the originator of them necessarily, but he, using his platform, I think, definitely has allowed for people to do some critical thinking and open up dialogue and discussion. And, not to say that he's entirely accurate or his history is that great, but as an historian, I'm saying his historical work is not necessarily great, but just as a thinker and as a personality, I appreciate what he's done to kind of break the mold of what is this reality? Is it possible that we're in a matrix type of system? Are these alien beings real? And if so, would it be possible that we live in a world that looks more like They Live? The John Carpenter film. So I think on the whole, I appreciate the work that he's done, regardless of whether or not I agree with everything he says, or can he back it up and verify it with his own experience? I'm sure he can't.
Yeah, anyone who talks a lot like David does about things that are more spiritual is bound to say some things that not everyone's going to agree with. But I agree with you. I mean, he still says a lot of interesting stuff that makes people investigate more about the world we live in, rather than just looking at sort of the mainstream media's view of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, Gareth was talking on episode 23, so if you get the chance, he does talk about his sort of life, growing up with his father, talking about these issues.
And does he agree with it? I mean, ultimately, has he kind of accepted that worldview, or has he rejected it?
I think he's finding more and more he accepts what's going on. I don't know whether he accepts everything. I mean, it probably would be difficult for someone to say they didn't agree with everything their father said. I'm sure he doesn't. I mean, who does agree with everything their parents say?
Well, exactly. I mean, who agrees with everything that anyone says? At the end of the day, it's about us finding our own spiritual truth and being able to accept, or at least hold, these ideas that seem far out, because I believe imagination is the most important thing. The mind is the key to all reality. And we get so caught up in the material sense of existence and being that we oftentimes misunderstand the true nature of magic, which is the deployment of mind. Being able to, first of all, conceive of something in order to manifest or create it, but also the fact that things can be occurring in different dimensions of existence and only manifesting here in a symbolic form. So, to me, the key is just not to be caught up too much with this realm or this world. And all the spiritual teachings really are about that, whether it's, the Judeo-Christian tradition, what Christ was telling us, what Muhammad was talking about when he said this world is, basically is no better. The root of all evil is believing in this world. really this world is not the end all be all as we know, and we shouldn't be too tied up with the concrete, so-called concrete reality, but really more in the mind, the imagination, the power of creativity, because obviously this is also influencing our emotional states, and that's going to either give us a healthier prognosis as a human race, if we actually had a better trajectory and grasp of our fears and desires. And I think that's really where it has to begin with us and our mindset.
Do you think? I mean, you mentioned They Live, which is a fantastic film. Anyone who hasn't seen They Live, the John Carpenter film, then you owe it to yourself to watch it. It's great, but do you think people could become too fearful and sort of almost full of paranoia, or even become maybe too spiritual as well? I have met some people who are so spiritual you can't actually have a sensible conversation with them as well.
Well, when you go down these roads, and I try to deal with it a little bit in Greystone Park, my feature film that came out 2 years ago.
It's quite scary, that one, isn't it? I saw a couple of clips from that. It looked pretty frightening.
I hope so. I hope it's scary. I had to deal with my fears in the process of making it, because I was going to these places that challenge you. They challenge your psyche, they challenge your mind, because again, you're going to places, abandoned mental hospitals, haunted locations that you can't. They're dark. You think you're alone, but you're not quite sure if someone else is there. You're not sure if are there demons that are that could be lurking in these locations, that are playing with your mind, that are making you see things, that are making you hear things. But it goes back to this issue of the psyche, and when you go down these paths, you can ultimately abandon reality. That's when you're in the mental hospital. And I know what you're saying. I've met people like this who are just so caught up in the spiritual states of existence, or they've maybe sometimes lost themselves into different domains. Let's say like astral planes. They've lost some part of their soul has been lost. They never really come back, right?
Yeah.
And, we always wondered that if people who are having mental issues, mental problems, couldn't, rather than just having a physiological diagnosis, they couldn't be having some kind of spiritual breakdown that causes a schizophrenia or a bipolarity, right, or a multiple personality disorder. Could that be a spiritual problem? And we don't really look at that in the modern realm, because it's all been concretized and and labeled, and we can understand that the brain is malfunctioning. But again, what's causing that brain to malfunction? And we know that there's energetic states that are beyond the physical measurement. I'm sorry, they could potentially be measured physically, but they're beyond our physical body as far as we understand it. And these energetic states are what constitute us. So that's when when you start getting into energies, that's when you start getting into the spiritual realm and the different colors, because every energy has a vibration at a certain frequency that can be graphed, and that's why people see different auras and people's chakra system, for example, and what color they're resonating at. So there is a science. I think there is a science that's possible. There's a spiritual science, but I think that it's a shame to not try to account for that in our medical, like in our approach to medicine, for example. And I've heard, like RT reported recently, that there's been a mass study of life after death, and that now scientists are looking seriously at the idea that yes, there is a life after death, that people who were technically dead, 40% or more, reported hearing things and recalling things from beyond, even though their body was technically dead, and were still able to recall things. So I hope that science gets more interested in approaching and addressing these issues, because there is a science to it. And I think what you're talking about, the spiritual people, sometimes they get too mystical, and they don't want to necessarily deal with the idea that yes, there is a science to this. It's not purely in the realm of whatever I'm experiencing and whatever I feel is what I believe. It's like, no, I can have my experience and I can relate, but I'm going to try to relate my experience to others and try to still ground myself in a terrestrial existence, engaging with other people, and getting feedback and learning and growing and expanding, because we're obviously still on this planet for a reason. If you want to check out completely, then you would ultimately you could leave the body behind and pass on and carry on to the next existence. But as long as you're here in physical form, then there are reasons that are still weighing us, let's say, like gravity, into this existence.
I agree with you. We are, it seems logical to me that we are here for a reason. And therefore, if you think about it logically, there must be an afterlife, because if there isn't, it's a pretty pointless existence we'll be living. But I mean, some people disagree with that view, but it seems to make sense to me.
Well, the existential point of view got into that whole question of, whether would it be pointless, would it be futile for us to be here, like Sisyphus, for example, pushing a boulder up a hill over and over, right, day after day, and ultimately there's no relent to this journey.
Yeah.
And I guess it boils down to your philosophy. But in my experience, in my own, questioning of myself, and not even just, it's not from drugs. It's literally just from my own sense of memory and instinct and intuition. It draws me to the conclusion: yes, we are eternal beings. We've had past selves, and we'll have future selves, and this is not the be-all end-all by any means. And that's what makes me, I guess, a spiritual person. I think most people kind of would be classified as that, though. I do believe across the world, most people do have some inclination that there is more to this world than just what we're seeing with our 2 eyes and 2 ears.
Yeah, it does seem so. I was going to say, having a famous father and talking about some of the issues not so much the spiritual ones, but maybe some of the ones that are more political, which could get you into hot water. Is it a protection having a famous father, or is it actually more of a liability?
Well, I mean, I'm sure it brings more attention.
Yeah.
I think it's always a double-edged sword. I can't imagine what my life would have been like without having my father, because again, it's not so much whether or not he's famous in the eyes of the world. It's just that's my reality. Is he was my father, and a lot of his ideas and his way of viewing things, and his overall questioning nature and his quest for truth was imparted to me from a young age. From the point of being a kid in JFK, and playing the son of Kevin Costner in that film, where it's I'm basically listening to this argument and hearing this line of thinking that Kennedy was assassinated by shadowy elements within our own power structure, right? That imparts into you a sense of questioning, and ultimately it can lead you to follow that same path. So I don't know if I would be who I am without my father. You see, so the whole line of questioning is impossible, because if I was born to someone else and in a different context, I might have a totally different worldview. I might not be interested by these subjects, right?
Yeah.
So who I am is very much a continuation of the questioning my father has done, and in many ways I'm going further in terms of the questions and in terms of the subject matter. I have no problem, talking and questioning and openly doing so about conspiracies, because I grew up with a father who was labeled a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah,
so it's like assuming the mantle and just saying, okay, fine, you can call me a conspiracy theorist. I don't take offense to it. I'll call myself such. I'm also a conspirator.
Yeah. Your father, supporter of people like Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden. What about yourself? Do you consider them heroes or villains?
Well, I think that's a very simplistic way of media kind of spin way of looking at all these people. I think that each situation is different. I think what Assange did with WikiLeaks was obviously so threatening and dangerous that they had to come after him on these sexual abuse charges that, to me, they seem kind of flimsy. And I think it's WikiLeaks was a tremendously dangerous voice for truth, basically. And I hope that his legacy can continue on, and that more whistleblowers will be willing to come out and step forward. I mean, the case of Snowden, for example, Snowden was a whistleblower who chose to identify himself. I don't think that he had to do that. I think given the situation, he could have remained anonymous and leaked the information he wanted to. I think he wanted to be a movie star in a certain sense, and I think he has a whole manifesto that I haven't read about privacy. So I don't know enough about his psyche. I think my dad's working on a film, and I'll be really curious to read the script and see what he makes, because